200 Comanche warriors don't line up outside a barn by accident. They come for blood, for justice, or for war. And on that night, Thaddeus Bear Mallister was about to find out which of those three things had brought an entire army to his land. But it all started 24 hours earlier. The Texas sun hung low and brutal over the dry earth, turning the fields into an open furnace. Bear was repairing a broken fence near the creek when he spotted movement on the far side of his property. At first, he thought it was a wounded animal. Then he realized it was a child. She moved in a crooked line, stumbling every few steps, as if each yard demanded more strength than her body had left. Her clothes were torn, traditional native garments stained with dust and mud. And even from a distance, Bear recognized that kind of weakness. It wasn't exhaustion. It was hunger. Out in that part of the country, most men would have reached for a rifle before taking a single step forward. Tension between ranchers and the Comanche had already carved too many scars into too many lives. Stories of raids, retaliation, and disappearances passed through every town. Nobody saw a native child alone on open land and immediately thought of mercy. But Bear was never like most men. He dropped his tools and walked toward her slowly, hands visible, the way a man approaches a frightened horse. When he got close, he saw she was a little girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old. Her face was far too thin, her lips cracked, her eyes hollow and terrified. She tried to say something in Comanche. Bear didn't understand a word. He didn't need to. The girl touched her mouth, then pointed to the creek, then to her own chest. The message was clear. She was dying. Bear looked around as if the land itself might judge him. He thought about his neighbors, about the danger, about every reason to turn away. Then he looked into the girl's eyes again. And in that instant, the decision was already made. He picked her up. She was too light, lighter than any child should ever be. She didn't fight him, simply letting herself be carried, trembling as if the wind alone could break her in half. Bear took her to his cabin, shoved the door open with his shoulder, and set her down in the only chair he owned. The smell of stew still lingered over the stove. Bear grabbed the bowl, filled it to the top, and cut a thick piece of fresh bread. When he turned to hand it to her, he saw something shift across her face, something almost painful to witness. For the first time since he found her, there was something there besides fear, hope. She grabbed the bowl with shaking hands and ate like someone who had gone too long without knowing if she would ever see food again. Bear watched in silence. And that was when he noticed the necklace. The colored beads, the careful pattern, the handmade symbol at the center. He had seen something like it before. A week earlier, a neighbor had mentioned the ceremonial beadwork worn by the family of Chief White Bull, the most respected and most feared Comanche leader in that region. Bear froze. If that necklace was what he thought it was, then this was not just a lost child. This was White Bull's daughter, and that changed everything. The daughter of a chief was a symbol. If anyone believed Bear had taken her, there would be no explanation good enough to save him. At that exact moment, miles away, a Comanche search party was finding fresh tracks leading straight toward Bear's land. At the front of the group, riding with rigid posture, was White Bull himself. By the time the sun disappeared, the little girl was asleep, wrapped in the only blanket in the cabin. Then Bear heard horses. He stepped outside. 3 men rode up the path. His neighbor Cletus, Sheriff Jake Morrison, and Reverend Thomas. Cletus dismounted first. "You fool, what did you do?" The sheriff got straight to it. Word came in from town. Chief White Bull's daughter vanished 3 days ago, and they've seen signal smoke on the hills. The Comanche are looking for someone. Bear's silence was enough. "She's here, isn't she?" the Reverend asked. Bear took a slow breath. "She is. She was starving. I couldn't leave that girl to die on my land." Cletus grabbed his head. "You don't understand. They're going to think you kidnapped her." Jake swung back onto his horse. "I have to warn the town. And you need to decide what you're going to do before they decide for you." "Then pray," Cletus said, his face pale. Because if White Bull comes, he won't come alone. The three men rode off. Bear stayed in the yard. Then he heard it. Drums, faint at first, deep, rhythmic. Too organized to be desperation. These were the sounds of men arriving ready for war. Bear rushed back into the cabin. The girl woke with a start. The moment she heard the drums, her face changed. She knew exactly what they meant. She spoke quickly, pointing outside, raising and closing her fingers over and over. Bear started counting. 10, 20, 100, 200. Not long after, the drums stopped. And the silence that followed was even worse. Bear moved to the window and saw shadows rising out of the night. Riders, first one, then 5, then dozens. Within moments, his entire property was surrounded by a perfect half-circle of mounted warriors. Moonlight flashed across war paint, spears, and arrowheads. This was not a rescue party. It was a judgment. A voice came from outside, strong and clear in English. "White man, we know you have something that belongs to our people. Bring the girl out. You may live until sunrise." The girl grabbed Bear's arm. It looked like she wanted to stop something. Bear drew a long breath, opened the door, and stepped outside with his hands raised. The girl followed close behind. At the front of the 200 warriors, on a horse as black as coal, sat White Bull. His face was hard as stone, his eyes carrying the kind of pain that had already turned into rage. The girl ran to him. White Bull dismounted, knelt, and examined her, searching for any sign of violence. She spoke rapidly, pointing to Bear, to the cabin, to the empty bowl. White Bull listened, then stood and walked toward Bear. "My daughter says you fed her," he said. "She says you gave her shelter." "Yes. She also says you saw the necklace of my family. You knew who she was." Bear swallowed. "I realized after she was already inside. She was too weak to travel." White Bull stepped closer. "Maybe, or maybe you thought of using her, trading her life for horses or safety." Behind him, the warriors adjusted their weapons. The sound was like a trap snapping shut. "No," Bear said. "I wanted nothing. I just couldn't watch a child die." White Bull raised his hand. In one single motion, 200 warriors pulled back the strings of their bows. The sound was so perfectly synchronized, it felt like one giant animal taking a breath. "Then prove it," the chief said. Proving kindness to a man who had every reason to expect cruelty was almost impossible. But then the girl ran into the cabin, pointing to the chair, the bowl, the blanket. Then she pointed at Bear. White Bull stepped inside. His eyes stopped on a small framed photograph on the table. It showed Bear's wife and son, both gone 3 years earlier. Beside the picture sat a bundle of dried flowers. White Bull picked up the photograph. "You lost a child too," he said, his voice lower now. Bear nodded. He was almost her age. Something shifted in White Bull's face. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was the first crack in the wall. Outside, angry voices rose among the warriors. They had come to punish a crime. One of them, a man with a scarred face named Broken Arrow, stepped forward. He began arguing with the chief in Comanche, jabbing his spear toward Bear. He wanted blood, and he wasn't alone. Then the girl stepped between her father and Broken Arrow, and she spoke. At first, she sounded like a frightened child. Then her voice grew stronger. She told them how she had wandered for days, how she had collapsed from hunger, and how the man who should have been her enemy had not raised a weapon, but offered food instead. White Bull began translating. She says he could have used her, hidden her, threatened her, but he asked for nothing. The girl pointed to the photograph. She says she saw sorrow in him, that he helped because he recognized pain. Broken Arrow answered sharply, questioning if one man's mercy could erase the past. The girl didn't step back. White Bull translated again, surprised. She asks Broken Arrow if he has children, and what he would pray a stranger would do if his own child were starving alone on the open land. The warrior went still. Then the girl turned to all the others. Her voice was small, but it forced 200 armed men to listen. White Bull translated in a whisper. She says if we punish mercy, we become no better than those who kill without asking. The silence that followed was complete. Broken Arrow lowered his spear. White Bull looked at Bear. My daughter has turned a war into a council. But this is not over. That night, Bear was taken to the Comanche camp. A tribal council was waiting. The debate went on for a long time. At last, the girl stepped forward and spoke with a calm, clear voice. When she finished, the oldest elder asked her one question. The girl answered without hesitation. White Bull turned to Bear. He asked if she believes you would risk your life to save a Comanche child again, knowing what might happen. And what did she say? Bear asked. White Bull held his gaze. Yes, the elder rose. White Bull translated his words. The spirits sent us a test. Not of our strength to destroy, but of our wisdom to recognize mercy. You will have safe passage back to your land. He wasn't finished. From this day on, your property will be under the protection of this council. If one of ours comes to your door hurt, lost, or hungry, you must show the same kindness. I promise, Bear answered. Then the girl ran to him and wrapped her arms around him. In broken English, she said, "You saved me. Now I saved you." At dawn, Bear returned to his ranch, escorted not by an execution party, but by an honor guard. Slowly, the patch of land where he had nearly died became neutral ground between two worlds. He never became rich or a legend. But he spent his life knowing one bowl of stew had been stronger than 200 drawn bows. Every year the girl returned. She became a respected woman who could move between worlds, translating not just words, but intentions. They'd share a meal and remember the day mercy defeated vengeance. Bear died peacefully at 73, and the people who came to honor him came from both sides of a line that once would have killed without hesitation. Because sometimes courage isn't pulling the trigger. Sometimes courage is opening the door. Sometimes it's trusting a starving child when the world tells you not to. And sometimes the difference between a war and a bridge begins with one man looking at someone he was supposed to call an enemy and choosing instead to see her as somebody's daughter, somebody worth saving. Thanks for watching. If this story moved you, please like and subscribe for more.